Hi everyone, welcome. As you can see, I've got a little tray here with some frozen vegetables in it. Cucumbers, carrots, parsnips, peels. I think there's even some berries in here. And this is the coffee, the used coffee out of the coffee machine, including the coffee filter. I've got a system right here on the bench in front of me. I'm going to be feeding this system today. This system's got red wigglers in it. Red wigglers that were originally sourced from my outdoor worm bag, which in itself was sourced from my compost barrel. So I assume that they're red wigglers, but I couldn't say for certain. They were basically wild caught worms that I've since domesticated, if that makes sense, or if that's even true. What's the definition of domesticating? I don't know. I broke these worms. Not really. I mean, to a certain degree, I almost have to assume that the reason I've got a pretty good number of composting worms out in my garden at all that can, you know, find my compost barrel and, leverage the stuff that gets placed in there as food. I have to assume that that's the reason I've got worms like that. Unless they're natural to my habitat, I couldn't even tell you for certain. So the coffee filter that I just moved aside was indicating to us where we last fed, and I think it was pretty obvious too, just based on I'm not sure if it's visible from where the camera is, but just based on the depression on this side of the bin, kind of the vacuum formed as a result of the foods getting depleted. So we've got a couple different things going on in this system. We've got I'll pull it out here so we can get a better look at it. I've got some cotton materials here that are serving as our bedding for this side of the bin. Here we have a part of a sock, and then over here we have the part of a beach towel. And we've been running the cotton bedding in this system for a little bit over a month now. It's 36 days aged as worm bin bedding. And we've been just coming into this bin and switching from side to side to feed here. And the last time we fed here, we gave them parsnip, a whole bunch of parsnip shavings. And there were a couple larger pieces that I thought we might bump into. That's what I was curious of. But then again, 14 days? No, 12 days since the last feeding, it could have been nibbled away. Even though there was this one part of it, like a parsnip is a white carrot sort of on the top before it starts to taper down to the bottom, right where the leaves pop out. It was a good sized parsnip, so the top of the thing was this big, and that piece chopped off without any leaves on it was placed in here too, alongside all the shaved, kind of the skin shaving type pieces. And I thought there'd be some sign of at least that large piece. But if there isn't, that's fine too. It's a material that I would assume is pretty heavily concentrated with sugars and stuff, because it is kind of sweet when you eat it in a soup or whatever, sort of like a carrot. So I'm sure there's still juices and lingering bits of that last feeding in here. It's just very difficult to isolate it and locate it. So my thought was that maybe just by rummaging through here a little bit, we might bump into some leftovers, some scraps of that parsnip, but I wasn't really holding my breath either. Number one is there could still be some, but it's just very hard to locate. Or number two is that they could have just eaten it all. So it's kind of nice to see some worms actually camped out on this sock. Hopefully also nibbling on it here and there once in a while. So I haven't really taken a lot of time to examine any of these pieces of bedding. So it is interesting to see how things are progressing. Here's the beach towel, another piece of it. It's in a couple different pieces. They're hanging out on it. Some small ones, some larger ones. So that's kind of cool. All right, let's return. Oh, here's another piece of sock. Kind of forgot how much I had placed in here. I guess there was a pretty good amount of it. So we're not feeding this side. All we're doing on this side is taking the feeding zone indicator with us when we're done here, so that we can mark the other side, which is where we're feeding next. And then whatever leftovers might still be lingering in here will be given additional time to just continue. This looks like the stem of a banana that goes way, way back. It takes time for a banana stem to get to that degree of decomposition and breakdown in a worm bin. It's one of the tougher things for them to break down. Alright, so yeah, I was just curious what was happening over on that side. I'm also curious to see how, 36 days of exposure to the worm bin does to cotton. So that brings us back over to the side that we are feeding today, where we're going to plop in that feeding I showed earlier. Here, we're using a different type of bedding. On this side, we're using twine. So let's see if we can start to check out how it's coming along here. So here we go. This is pretty easy to see it, I think. You could see the different strands of the twine over here. It's stuff that sat outside for quite a long time, so even before the worms were given a chance to, try to beat up on this twine, the twine was just sitting outside being exposed to the ultraviolet light and the rays of the sun, getting beaten up out there for probably a year and a half or so, or longer. So the stuff is super weathered, and that's probably the same I can say about the towel too, that beach towel that I showed on the other side. That beach towel was also getting pounded by the sun and the UV rays for years and years. So none of these materials really came in very fresh. Perhaps the socks, if you want to consider socks that I wore until they got full of holes as fresh. Alright, so I think last time we came in here to feed 12 days ago when we fed the cotton side, I thought we saw some traces of leftovers, and this could be something. I don't really remember what kind of food had been placed in here, but this looks like it could be the skin of some sort of food that they might have received in a previous feeding. Here too, this has that distinct appearance of somehow being a food. It doesn't just, I guess it just doesn't resemble the types of beddings that I use. It doesn't look like a piece of paper or cardboard. It looks like the skin of something. It's tough to tell, Once the worms start to nibble away at it, they take off all the choice, soft, select bits of material, and then they'll come back for the rest later. So certain parts of certain foods take a little longer to eat than other parts of it. Here, these look like shreds of paper. Those are probably bits of bedding that I had placed in here previously. But I guess the star of the show when it comes to the bedding is meant to be the twine and the cotton. So before we feed, I want to make sure I collect up as much of it as I can locate so I can put it right where the feeding is going to be put, so I can continue to expose this stuff pretty continually to the onslaught of worm traffic. It's not a very scientific test, but it's just a chance to see if I should expect success composting stuff like this in the future, or if it's, maybe just something that takes so long it's not practical to use it in the indoor worm bins, maybe work on composting it outside somehow. Alright, I think this bin is probably ready for a little portion of food. I guess I'm really just sort of trying to aerate here as I probe my fingers into the material and try to break it up a little bit. I've been pretty generous with bedding lately, and I think to myself, should I or shouldn't I add bedding with this feeding? For now, I'm thinking maybe just stick to the test bedding materials. And then in time we can start getting back to adding additional bedding. But it does seem to me like the system was built with sufficient bedding to go around. So I'm not going to add any today. We'll just keep letting it go as is with what we've already gotten here. So I'm spreading the twine out. I don't even know how to gauge its breakdown or its progress. I just figured at some point it would be hard to see individual strands anymore. So hopefully the worms are nibbling into it. I guess since the feeding went on the other side last time, and the few leftovers that we saw on this side last time were really the only traces of food, not too surprising that this side's not too heavily occupied with worms. So I think we've got kind of a worm-free pile of bedding here, but before we drop in the frozen stuff, I guess I'll sprinkle a little bit of this coffee down first as a little bit of an insulating layer, since that's not frozen. And I guess then we can start bringing in the frozen veggies. Here we've got carrot and cucumber. Looks like some radish. Ooh, I think these were the berries I thought we saw earlier. Somewhat dried out berries. Alright, so we've sprinkled in about half of the portion they're getting today. Let's see how we can continue dressing up this feeding zone. Once in a while I like to take these coffee filters that I use as the feeding zone indicator and transform it into bedding to go with the feeding. That's what I'm doing here. I've also got another type of food that I'm going to include with this, which is my homemade worm chow. I've just been sort of peppering it in with every feeding in all my systems. And you know what? Let's include grit as well. This is crushed eggshell. You know, if it's hard for them to work down that twine, perhaps a little bit of extra grit will help with things there. So now on to the rest of it. So we kind of just broke it into two little portions here. We laid in some of what we bought down for them, and now we'll just lay in the rest. And that looks like a pretty nice, generous feeding for them. Hopefully they enjoy it. So just to recap really quickly, this is the stats on the system that we're working on here. I wasn't even sure if I showed it earlier. I don't think I did. I might have read some stuff off of it earlier though. So the age of the bin, the time that each of the types of twine have spent in the bin. This is feeding number 6, and it was 12 days since we last fed the system, so I think we mentioned that already too. So all right, things look pretty nice in here. Things look definitely more active where the parsnips had been placed, because there must have still been some leftovers there. But whatever it is that was placed in here prior must have really dwindled down to hardly anything, because this side didn't seem like it had all that many worms in it. But it seems like a pretty nicely populated bin, and it seems like they're doing a pretty good job. I definitely see lots of castings mixed all over the place. You know, one part of the bin that we don't really check on much is the middle when we get into these side-by-side or side-to-side, back-and-forth type feedings. But this middle section, you got to admit, this has got to be a part of the bin where there's got to be a lot of traffic with the worms constantly getting pulled from left to right in pursuit of the most recent application of food. So maybe once in a while we'll just take a peek down the middle too to see how things look. That might be where we end up seeing the most castings. Who knows? Maybe a lot of worms too. All right, I think we're in great shape here. Let's start covering up so we can put this bin back up on the shelf and let them continue on their merry way. Breaking down our bedding. It'll be kind of nice to see those socks disappearing, but you know, after a little bit over a month, I'm not expecting a lot of progress on it. It's just one of those things that's going to take time. Who knows how much time, we'll see. So what else do we have? Plastic covering, bubble wrap, and we're done. All right, everyone, that's it for today's video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.